I just want to introduce my guest. This is Jorge.
Hi, guys.
He's an MC from the place to be out in the Bronx. We got him here in AZ now.
This is Teddy, everybody.
Teddy,
Yep. The top hand, right?
Things plugged in. So I've been into hip hop since I was a little kid. Little Bow Wow was the first artist I really connected with. I played and rapped along to his CDs constantly, but over time hip hop became more than just music to me. One night I was with my cousin and we were in a really serious situation where his life was actually threatened. And afterwards we were sitting in my car decompressing and trying to come down from everything that happened, and we ended up putting on a track by Kendrick Lamar. The song's called Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst. And the song ends with a prayer called the Sinner's Prayer, and it's led by Maya Angelou, and we didn't just listen to it, we prayed it out loud, and we were holding hands and crying, and it was a real moment of healing, and it came through hip hop. A couple years later, I was working a contract job out of state, during the 2020 election where I got to count ballots, and I ended up seeing real votes cast for Kanye West and the birthday party. And that moment made me realize that hip hop isn't just shaping culture, it's shaping how people engage with identity, leadership, and even democracy. And that was the first time I seriously started thinking about the power hip hop holds, not just socially, but politically and globally. So I was already pretty into Ye, but after that election, I got really into him. I was listening to his interviews all the time, and his music, and just looking closely at everything he was saying about faith, artistry, politics, and the music industry. And I was trying to make sense of what it meant that people were actually voting for him, and what it meant that he was even running. It made me start thinking more seriously about how hip hop shapes identity, influence, and public perception. Not just in terms of music and branding, but in terms of power, and how artists are able to move people politically, culturally, and even spiritually. A few years later, I visited the Musical Instrument Museum here in Phoenix for the second time. My first time was back in junior high, and when I got home, I started looking at job listings at the MIM. That's when I noticed that a lot of the curators, especially the curator of education, which was the role that I was most interested in, had degrees in musicology. That was a turning point for me. I started thinking about how I could research hip hop, not just as something I love, but as something with the political and spiritual and cultural weight that it has. I started learning how hip hop has been used as a tool for diplomacy, both by grassroots communities and by institutions. And that's what brought me to grad school. And that's what led me to ask, how does hip hop function here in Arizona? Not just as soft power, but from above, but as something built locally from the ground up. So once I started thinking about hip hop as something with political and cultural weight, I knew I needed to see what that looked like here in my own community. So I started showing up. I went to Trill before I started grad school. I was just pulling up, asking questions and listening and trying to figure out how all of these things connected. Trill is a hip hop retail and art space in Phoenix. And the first time I went, the owner, Chuck, he was there, and he answered a lot of my questions and shared the story about how the space got started. And it's not just a store. One of the first questions I asked him was about a big hip-hop museum that was being proposed in the Bronx, and he discussed how Trill was like a museum in itself, and if you go there, you can really see that. Later on, I met Ali. He's the general manager at the store, and then some. He really holds it down over there. And he allowed me to put some of my OVO, which is Drake's brand, and Yeezy gear up for sale. And that might seem small, but for me, it showed me that this community isn't just about clout and gatekeeping. It's about trust, respect, and putting each other on, or building. Word to the homie Katz. I'll get to him later. Around that same time, I was applying for internships at the Musical Instrument Museum, auditing musicology classes, and going to open sessions and local events. The more I paid attention, the more I realized what's happening here in Arizona isn't just creative, it's cultural diplomacy. So my thesis is that hip-hop in Arizona functions as grassroots cultural diplomacy. It builds relationships across cultural and generational lines, preserves community memory, and transforms conflict, not through official policy, but through everyday practice. In a state marked by surveillance, hip-hop offers resistance. In a landscape shaped by settler colonialism, it creates space for exchange. And where systems enforce exclusion, these practices build new forms of belonging. So Arizona's political terrain is full of contradictions. On one hand, the state loves to push like a whole independent, tough on government image, but in reality, it leans really hard on federal power, especially when it comes to borders, land, and locking people up. It's not just bureaucracy. This place has a long history of patriarchal white supremacy, plain and simple. If you didn't know, we were the last state to recognize Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a paid holiday. And I feel like that tells you a lot about what kind of power gets preserved here and whose humanity is being prioritized. Political scientist David Berman talks about this in his book, Arizona Politics and Government. He shows how Arizona maintains the illusion of autonomy while using federal support and local law enforcement to enforce exclusion, especially against indigenous, Black, and migrant communities. That's the environment that the hip-hop community here is responding to, and not just on the mic, but in how people gather, move, and create space for each other. In 2010, Arizona passed SB 1070. It was one of the harshest anti-immigration laws in the country. It gave police the power to stop and detain anyone they suspected of being undocumented, basically legalizing racial profiling. Phoenix rapper Willy Northpole released a track called Back to Mexico as a direct response. I'm gonna put that video on. Just wanna go back. I wanted to point out this. See how this looks. You can see right here, there's a paint swatch on the cops' like little tool belt.
New laws like a sign of hatred, you know?
And it's a prop to kind of show the racial profiling that was going on with the police. So I'm just gonna play like a verse from the song.
It should be called to go back to Mexico laws. They say we the people, but who are the people? Basically, to me, we're the victims, you know? I feel like it's Bush again, even Colin Powell, dear Jan Brewer, dear Joe Pyle. It's time we fight back. Okay to break their jaw, cause they ain't fighting fair. Okay to break the law. I'm fellow Mexicans, you know I got your back. Welcome to our world. They did it to the blacks, they did it to the natives. I'm just stating facts. They did it to the Jews, they did it to Iraq. Our state is full of shit, that's why I'm full of gangs. When I say full of shit, I say John McCain. Land of the free,
Rest in peace.
Back to Mexico, that's what the law says. But deep down inside, they want us all dead. It's racial profiling, the devil stepping in. Welcome to Arizona, but don't be Mexican. That's why I say we march, that's why I say we fight. Cause even Malcolm X was tired of being nice. They say we the people, but who are the people? Cause y'all the ones illegal. I'll shoot that fucking eagle. Yeah, I love my country, but we the ones killing. But what we done for? Let's ask Pat Tillman. Back to Mexico, that's what the law says. Deep down inside, they want us all dead. That's why I say we fight. It's not a pillow fight. It's like Bill O'Reilly just wrote the Bill of Rights.
It's like Bill O'Reilly just wrote the Bill of Rights. Okay, we're back. Willy Northpole isn't just rapping here, he's teaching. He connects SB 1070 to Black, Native, and immigrant struggles, and he makes it personal, political, and historical. Scholar Marcus Del Hierro calls this kind of work pedagogical intervention. It's hip-hop doing what school often doesn't, telling the truth, building solidarity, and making people feel seen. Ooh. There we go. So SB 1070 didn't only target immigrants, it also affected indigenous people living on their own ancestral land. Being asked for proof of citizenship in your own homeland is a specific kind of violence. Marcus de Alhierro writes about a group called First Nations United, a coalition of indigenous artists and activists who showed up at protests using hip-hop, drumming, and traditional song to claim space and demand visibility. Kyle Mays takes this further. He talks about how indigenous youth use hip-hop to push back against settler colonialism and build connection with Black communities through shared experiences of surveillance and displacement. These artists weren't just reacting, they were holding it down, showing up, creating space, and making survival possible through culture. The events I've been going to, Trill's open sessions, Family First Friday, Fader Manners, and Worth the Wait have shown me how much hip-hop in Arizona can hold. You have DJs, dancers, OGs, newcomers, and kids, people from all different backgrounds showing up to build. And from what I've seen, a lot of folks are trying to make space for different stories, different identities, and different ways of showing up. House, Professor Jorge Edson Magaña here at ASU talks about this in his thesis on the event Worth the Wait. He writes about sustainability in hip-hop, not just the art, but the care that it holds together. This looks like mentorship and like people being invited back and like culture being passed down with intention. I think part of that care means recognizing who's been pushed out before. Women, LGBTQ folks, and others have been left out of hip-hop spaces in different ways over time. But these events feel like they're trying to be different, not by being perfect, but by offering chances to be seen, to contribute, and to connect. That kind of intention reminds me of something I came across in a book called Build by Mark Katz. Mark Katz's book Build was a big inspiration for how I started thinking about this work. He writes about hip-hop as diplomacy and specifically about the Next Level program, where U.S. artists travel abroad through the State Department to build relationships through culture. That model is really powerful, but what I've been observing here in Arizona is different. The diplomacy I've seen here isn't federally funded. It's not official. It happens at Trill and these other events, in small rooms, open sessions, and back-to-back conversations. No one's calling it diplomacy, but it's building something real. The energy is the same, people building bridges through culture. The structure is just different. There's no paperwork, no passport, just people. So before I wrap, I want to bring in Kendra Salois, who writes about programs like Next Level and how they function as cultural diplomacy. Even though these projects are artist-led, they still are tied to U.S. foreign policy, and they serve state interest. Salois argues that they often promote soft power, using hip-hop to frame the U.S. in a positive light abroad. That might open doors, but it also raises questions. Who defines what hip-hop diplomacy is, and who benefits from it? Salois reminds us that cultural exchange is never neutral, and that's what makes the work here in Arizona different. It's not driven by soft power, it's driven by community. So all this started because I showed up. I walked into Trill, I watched the session, I asked questions, and I kept coming back. At first, I wasn't thinking about it as research. I was trying to understand what was going on and why it felt important. The more I kept showing up to Family First Fridays, to Worth the Wait, to Fader Manners, the more I started to notice a pattern. These weren't just events, they were spaces where people could build with each other, return to each other, and practice culture as something living. I started reading Mark Katz, House, and Kendra Salois, and it helped me name what I was seeing. Mark Katz gave me a framework for hip-hop diplomacy. House showed me that sustainability and care are already happening here, and Salois reminded me to stay critical of where funding and influence come from and how that shapes who gets seen and heard. What I've come to believe is that hip-hop in Arizona is doing diplomatic work too. It might not be state-sponsored, it might not be international, but it brings people together across lines that usually divide them. Race, gender, generation, and experience. It builds trust one event at a time. And it's had a real impact on me personally. When I first started going to the open sessions at Trill, I used to just sit in the corner. I wasn't really part of it. I was watching, soaking it all in. But now I'm in the Bboy circles. I've been dancing and breaking. And this week at the open session, I got to do a 10-minute DJ set. I played all Drake and Kendrick Lamar. And at Fader Manners, the event to learn scratching, I won the first veteran and rookie scratch tournament competition. So I'm not the reigning champ, but I am a champ. The community embraced me, and I embraced it back. And I also have been helping out at Family First Fridays, and this next one that's coming up, the guy who normally runs it is out of town, so I'm gonna be in charge. All this happened in just a year, and I think that's really wild. So if you take anything from this presentation, I hope it's that the work doesn't always happen on a stage or in a spotlight. A lot of it happens in parking lots, practice rooms, dance circles, and conversations after the music stop. That's where the culture lives, and that's where I'll keep showing up. And what I have planned next for this research is to do interviews and gain oral histories from artists, DJs, and the organizers at these events. I actually have my little IRB protocols I wanted to pass around if you guys want to see them. I'll just let you take that around. But yeah, I got my IRB clearance. I didn't put in the whole full submission. I just got my protocols in there because it was like 25 pages. But yeah, that's the plan. I really want to document the experiences that people have had and compare to my own. Yeah, questions? Okay, comments, concerns?
That's so interesting. I'm really interested to hear how hip-hop is used as cultural diplomacy here in Arizona. I have a question for you, though. You mentioned that the Arizona-based hip-hop organizations like yours function just like on a grassroots level. They don't have funding and stuff from the federal government. Mark Katz was actually the professor of Dr. Christy J. Wells at University of Carolina at Chapel Hill, and so we Zoomed with him on this topic. And Katz was very honest. He goes, you know, the reason why I'm able to get federal funding for next level is because I'm a white guy and I speak the language of these diplomats who are controlling all the funding. And he's like really down home about it. Is that something that, are you guys content to do just like on a grassroots level? Or are you going to be looking for funding? And if so, how would you go about doing it? Or, I mean, it might be a disadvantage actually to go for federal funding in this particular political climate.
Right.
What's your impression on that? And would you ever follow a Katz example and get somebody to go up to the big guys in DC and advocate for you and try to get some money? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's kind of like Sawa was saying with her work of like, you don't have as much control when they're paying the tab. But that's kind of the reason I'm here, is to get these credentials and to be able to get that kind of leverage. I actually got to meet Mark Katz. He was just in town this past weekend. I got to pick him up from the airport. It was really cool. He came and gave a little seminar. He's working with an incarcerated artist on death row. And through his resources, he is able to help this artist make an album that he's had in the tuck since the 90s. And he just recently got to record it over a prison phone. And I feel like those kinds of, that's an example of the advocacy work that I can do with my privilege. Just like him, he spoke specifically about a moment with Aleem Braxton, who's the individual recording this music. And Aleem was working with someone who Mark felt was taking advantage of him. And Mark was trying to kind of warn Aleem, and Aleem kind of came back at him with like, I don't have the opportunity to not be exploited. Like you do, but I don't. So I need to, take that. And that's kind of how I want to come at it, is just using my privilege to build these connections and give people opportunities to have a voice.
I'd like to kind of answer your question in a sense. The people will make this happen. Just like Arizona reminds me of the Bronx back in the late 60s and 70s, where the people created the culture. Yeah. So here it is fresh, still here. I feel like it's so fresh still here. And that's kind of like a great opportunity for the people and to really get things going. All it really takes is wealthy entrepreneurs. That's it. It's so easy.
Yeah,
that's so word of mouth and just Trill and things like that. I have so many ideas to make Trill a bigger thing. I don't want to release it here, but I believe Trill is one of the places and entities that in history they'll look back and say Trill and people like Greek and us started a wonderful and inevitable thing.
Yeah. Next Level actually got their funding paused for a second. House was supposed to go to Uruguay like last month, and he's still going, but it's pushed back to next month. And I feel like this is like a real opportunity for us to start looking at corporate private donors rather than the feds, because it can get weird.
And the cash sound just came from my phone just now. I don't know if anybody heard that, but that's
Cha-ching, yeah.
There's no such thing as coincidence.
Yeah.
Cha-ching, it was like cha-ching.
We have any other
That's my job.
questions?
In your interviews, one of the questions that you ask these people is, like, what do you think people misunderstand or overlook about hip hop in Arizona? And, like, what is your take on some of the maybe common misconceptions or misunderstandings of how it's present in here?
I feel like we have a pretty prevalent and diverse like religious community out here, and I think Christian rap is popping off pretty hot right now. But I still think there's like a misconception of hip hop is overtly negative and not for spirituality or uplifting of people, and that's not the experience I've had at all. That's why I wanted to like include that Kendrick Lamar moment I had with my cousin, because it just is a really spiritual thing for me. So I'd say that's probably it.
I'd have to include that hip hop is a spiritual thing, and if you think about it, when blacks and Puerto Ricans were creating it to create peace and culture, because every other culture and police and government and other gangs and races were against them, the spirits came in and created that peace and unity, and look at it now, it's worldwide. And I'm just so surprised that Arizona's so way back, and it really just, but again, I'm kind of like honored to be part of this, because again, it's inevitable in the work of God.
I think it's my time.
I gotta go, guys. Good to meet you all.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'll definitely see you.
Appreciate
again.
your support. I'll catch you, brother. Thanks for coming.
Later.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.